This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the May 20th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you alongside Mike Hogan, a.k.a. at DRF Formulator. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing well, Pete. How are you?
I'm doing great. In a few minutes, we're going to bring in our other co-host, Jonathon Kinchen, to talk about all things having to do with the 141st running of the Preakness Stakes. But first, a very special guest returning to the show. You know her from her analysis work all over the television. She is Gabby Gaudet. Gabby, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. What a fantastic introduction. Makes me feel special.
That's my goal. Every guest who comes on the show, I try to make feel special. It's funny, my father was in broadcasting, and he would be made fun of because he had regular guests on the show, and every guest he would describe as a very special guest. And at some point, somebody called him on it and said, well, Pete, if you're saying every guest is special, are they really special? And his response always was, and I'm down with this idea, for that time they were on the show, they were very special to me. And there you go. That's most of the show. So
great answer.
It's fantastic to have you back on the show. We got a lot of positive feedback on your first appearance, and we brought you in because of your deep connection to Maryland racing. And so the first question I want to ask is more of a historical one. How many Preaknesses have you been to, and is there a particular memory of a Preakness that stands out to you?
I have been to, that's a great question. I've probably been to about 6 or 7 Preaknesses, maybe more than that. But the most memorable one was when we ran a horse in the Preakness, actually, Concealed Identity, back when Shackelford actually won. And that was a huge experience in itself because I did an interview earlier this week about this Preakness memory. I was actually galloping at the time. I was in college, and I was working in the morning, then getting in the car, going up to Towson to do my classes, and I was galloping Concealed Identity going into the Tefio, and he popped me in the face about 2-3 days out. He broke the bone under my eye, and my teachers had a lot of questions. I will say that too. They kind of pulled me aside.
Yeah.
And then he won the Tefio, the local prep for the Preakness, and then, it was a long shot. It was kind of full steam ahead, though, going into the Preakness, and just getting to go on the turf, the saddling area, that whole experience was pretty amazing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, Gabby, looking ahead to this year's Preakness, I assume it's opening day on Thursday, Black-Eyed Susan Stakes Day on Friday, then Preakness Saturday, big weekend coming up. Have you seen any horses on the track in the morning or even just in the afternoon walking by the stables area or paddock? Any ones that caught your eye that made you think, wow, that horse looks like they're going to be fantastic, either on the Black-Eyed Susan card or the Preakness card?
Well, it has, I will say, and I know a lot of people, these kind of all eyes are on Nyquist, but I really wasn't a fan of Nyquist going into the Derby. He deserves respect for his own merits alone, but I wasn't, a big fan going into the Derby, and ever since he's transitioned to Pimlico, day 1 they jogged him once the wrong way. Day 2 they jogged him twice the wrong way, and then he started to progress into galloping. And every day he comes out to the racetrack, it looks like he's getting better and better. I just think he's acclimated very well to Pimlico, whether he likes the surface, whether they're just really managing him appropriately. I don't know what the answer is, but he looked very well in the morning. So I'm starting to climb onto that bandwagon. Other than him, I will say even the other Doug O'Neill, the filly, Landover Sea, she seems to be acclimating very, very well. So this weekend I think Doug O'Neill's going to have a pretty potent combination.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. You just don't see in this day and age horses coming back in 2 weeks that often, especially a horse like Nyquist, who it seems like he's been managed so carefully. So that seems like significant information. He's making a better impression on you now than when he was being brought along slowly. Do we think maybe Nyquist is just a horse who thrives on his racing?
I think so, and I think this is a horse, he just has a really good mind as well. You look back at American Pharoah throughout the Triple Crown, and he took everything in stride mentally. He was kind of unflappable, and not to compare Nyquist to American Pharoah, but they do kind of have a similar demeanor. The only time that I really seen this horse wash out and lose his cool was when he first got down to Florida for the Florida Derby. He was jogging the wrong way. He had a lot of kidney sweat. He was just really washed out. But as the series progressed, as he was kind of going into the weekend, he got better and better. And that's what I'm seeing, especially here. But he didn't even start out bad, is what I'm saying. He's just slowly developing. Another horse that, talking to Keith DeSormo, that I thought was interesting was Exaggerator. And he said that in the morning the other day, when I was doing the interview, he said that this is a horse who recovers extremely quickly. That's his best attribute, that, he runs his race, he comes back, he eats everything in his feed tub, and he seems unfazed by it all, that the next day he's like bucking and rearing, ready to go. So I thought that was kind of an interesting attribute for the Exaggerator going into the Preakness, that he just physically recovers very well, and he's, to use Keith DeSormo's words, he's a doer. He's very good at his job.
Mike, are you still there? We may have lost.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I'll edit that. So Gabby, I know everything is super busy with all of your activities you have coming up in the next few days, so we won't keep you very long. Just wanted to ask one more question about the undercard of the Preakness. Is there any horse you're looking to bet on Saturday in any of the undercard races?
It's really going to depend on the weather conditions. I know, looking at the weather conditions, it looks like rain and 58 degrees. I like a lot of horses on the turf, and that's the only issue, is will these horses kind of like an off-going, will it be an off-going? But I like a long shot, whether or not she'll win in the Galliarette. I really like Nish Aurora for Kelly Rubley. I think she's going to be one that will be flying under the radar with Heath for trainer Bill Mott. I thought the Galliarette actually was a very interesting race. And in the Dixie, if it's an off-going, I don't really like him as much. The choose approval, but if I think Grand Arch will probably benefit if it's those conditions, but I'll stick between those two on Saturday.
Before we let you go, I do have one more question about the Preakness. Have you clapped eyes on Stradivari yet?
He just got in, and I've been in my office, unfortunately, but yeah, I wish I could be 5,000 places at once. Unfortunately, I can't. He looks like a really big, imposing animal. So that I thought was kind of the new shooter. And talking to the Doug O'Neill team, they're worried about Exaggerator for obvious reasons, but there's been a lot of talk about Stradivari and how fearful they are of this new shooter too.
I was at, with Jonathon, actually, Keeneland for the last race. It was one of those talk of Lexington situations where the hype was so much before that race, and with the way that he ran, he certainly seems like one I would definitely want to pay close attention to going forward. Gabby, thank you so much for joining us today. Have a fantastic Preakness. Are you going to be out once again at Santa Anita by chance for their Gold Cup contest where we got to hang out a little bit last year? Do you know if you're going to be heading out to that?
I'm not sure. If I can go out there, I would be super happy because I love going out to Santa Anita, but I don't know yet to answer that question. All eyes on Preakness right now, Pete.
I get it. I totally get it. But hopefully we'll get a chance to see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me once again. Always a pleasure.
Okay, now we're going to bring in the third member of our team. Calling in from the planet Texas, though shortly on his way to Southern California, where I am, Jonathon Kinchen. Jonathon, what's up?
Well, I'm not really sure this is fair that I have to follow Gabby, but
She's good, isn't she?
but I'm looking forward to hopping on an airplane. As weird as it sounds, I have like TSA security withdrawals if it hasn't been a long time. I just get excited going through TSA, and so I'll be ready to fix that itch today and get on a plane and head out to the best place in the world, and I'll be at the Eddie Logan in no time.
Be careful, folks out there. You know, the latest addiction, travel addiction, don't let this happen to you. But we are going to have a good time out there today, and we had some big news in the contest world, actually. Nate Newby announcing yesterday that there's now going to be a $1 million bonus to any player who wins one of the remaining Santa Anita contests for 2016 and goes on to win the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. Jonathon, does this, I mean, obviously you're a likely player in any Santa Anita contest, but does this carrot dangled in front of you mean something to you?
No, this is like being excited to go to your favorite restaurant and then finding out they're going to give like free dessert. Like, I mean, I was going to go to all three anyway, so this is just extra good news for me if I'm fortunate enough to pull off a win at one of their events. But I think it's great. I think that those guys deserve a lot of credit for being forward-thinking and trying new things. You know, they've added doubles, which you wrote about this week, to the betting menu for this weekend's tournament. They've also added some kind of superlative awards. The leader, after I think the first 5 races on each day, gets a little bit of a prize. Also, the person who handles the most money the entire weekend gets a prize. So it's always good, I think, and especially with as many tournaments as we're seeing pop up for these guys to continue to try to do new things to keep the interest of the players that are playing, but also to gather new players.
I love it because anytime I can write about people searching for that sort of life-changing score, that's a lot of fun. And this offers a fairly realistic opportunity at that. I'm not saying I think somebody's going to do it, but do you agree this is an attainable thing?
Oh, I mean, for someone who is alive for a life-changing score at the NHC, there's a heck of a lot better chance of doing this than there is of doing that, in my opinion. So, you know, I think that this is a much easier situation to try to win 2 tournaments in a year than it is to win the 660-person NHC that can be extremely challenging.
Do you think that's a function of simply the number of players at the BCBC versus the NHC, or do you think it has something more to do with the specifics of the live bankroll format?
I think that that's a tricky question. I think that it's probably the live. I know, you got me. I wasn't ready. You should have prepped. You should have texted me that you were going to ask me this question before we did it. Yeah, no, I think that, in my opinion, the 660 people in a $2 win place format makes it not random, obviously, but it makes it much more complicated than it is for a normal day where you can have one good opinion and bet all your money on that opinion and be right and do well. I
think that makes sense. I do think the number of people, though, is huge. We've never seen a 600-runner live bankroll contest. The other thing I wanted to get your opinion on is how the addition of doubles to the wagering menu changes your strategy. We're not used to too many contests that have multi-race wagers involved.
Yeah, it feels like that's all I'm going to bet this weekend. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it feels like it because my horseplay is predicated around picking winners, and I've adjusted and I'm learning to pick second and third place horses, and I've done well doing that at times. But my comfort zone is picking winners and identifying horses that the only horses in a race that can win. And so I think that with the ability to look at probables with doubles to understand what the odds are and what it's going to pay, you can get yourself into some really intelligent bets based on horses that you really think can win, and you can kind of cover your combinations to make sure that you're kind of guaranteed a profit if you're at least right about those two things. And so I'm really excited about that opportunity and looking forward to it for sure.
It's going to be fun. The other wrinkle, in addition to those new prizes, being offered at various stages in the contest is the elimination of trifectas. Not so much in the last year, but there was a little bit of a run in this contest where the winner had basically crushed a try and gotten so far ahead of the field that a lot of the regular players had complained to Nate and said, wait, we don't want to chase somebody who just puts up some crazy score on day one. That's not so much fun. They lobbied to him. He's trying this as an experiment, getting rid of the tries. He figured this is the perfect time to do it with the addition of doubles. What is your feeling about the elimination of tries? Is this something you're in favor of, or do you think this is going to be temporary and the tries will be back next Santa Anita contest?
Well, first off, let me start with I'm a big supporter of Nate Newby, and anything that he decides to do, I know that it's thought out, and I understand what he's saying here, and I appreciate that he's doing all these other things to add, and if he's going to take away, that's fine. At the same time, I've been very vocal at times, and it's one of probably my worst Twitter my worst Twitter attitudes, I guess is the best way to say it. I hate people that complain in tournaments. Like,
complaining about the complainers, huh?
Just like, it's just like, just figure it out or play a different game. Like, but this constant, excuse as to why you don't do well and why everyone else is doing well and you're not doing well, and like, if 4 people in a row have won a Santa Anita tournament because they've crushed a try, then if you need to take your tail to the house and figure out how to bet the trifecta, but I respect Nate. I'm happy that he added doubles, and if we're going to lose tries for a little while, that's fine. But to those that are complaining about it, get over it.
Did you see there was a funny little Twitter fight between 2 people that I'm huge fans of? On one hand, we have the master of ceremonies himself, TQ, Tom Quigley. In the other corner, the irrepressible Tommy Massis. Did you follow any of that?
I did. I actually quoted today. I love both of those guys. I really do. I love both of them. I'm Team TQ on that one, though.
I agree, and I love Tommy. Tommy was just complaining that this $1 million bonus announcement had come out so late, as if it somehow. I don't really know why he had an issue with that. Basically, what I think happened is they had this opportunity. They're excited about it. They're doing it just sort of as an add-on for this tournament. And folks who want to focus on it and really maybe change their travel plans, they can worry about the next Santa Anita contest that's going to be happening at the end of June or the one in October. To me, it's kind of a no-brainer to announce it and have the bonus in place going into this weekend, even if it is kind of at the 11th hour. But, Tommy, I still love you. Do you know if I ever told you guys what Tommy Massis's greeting to me is historically?
No.
He sneaks up behind me and grabs my ass. So you can tell Tommy and I have a pretty close relationship. All right, enough about that. Let's move on to talk about some of these races happening at Baltimore this weekend. And what I want to do is go over the pick 4. That's going to be the races for publichandicapper.com. But why don't we start with the Preakness and do that in as much depth as we want, and then with whatever time we have remaining, we can quickly look at those other 3 stakes or maybe even offer some other thoughts on the Preakness Day undercard. Does that plan sound good to you guys?
Works for me.
All right, excellent. So let's start with the Preakness. With the Derby, we went through horse by horse. That seemed popular with pretty popular with folks. So why don't we try the same method here, starting from the inside out. And Mike, will begin with you. Why don't you talk about our rail runner in the Preakness?
Well, Cherry Wine, he's the kind of horse that I think from a pace perspective certainly benefited in his last race. The 2 runners that finished ahead of him, as you say, Pete, didn't necessarily bathe themselves in glory. I don't know. He'll maybe be running on late, but he's not one I'd be looking. If anybody's going to beat Nyquist, I'm not leaning on him.
You have anything more positive to say on the Cherry Wine front, Jonathan? I kind of like him as a potential 3rd and 4th key type horse, but I don't see him cracking the exacta.
Yeah, look, I'm obviously I influence the weather, but I don't really speculate too much about the weather. But You know, you got to think the horse deserves a little bit of an upgrade if it comes up sloppy. He had that race at Churchill in the slop that he won by 9 lengths. Like I said, I trust Dale Romans. It's kind of what leaded me to Brody's calls in the Derby. The horse deserves a look underneath. He's going to be a price. He's the type of horse that if he's 20-1, you use him underneath. If he's 9-1, you hope he doesn't run because you don't want him in your try at 9-1. It just doesn't present any value with the likely horses like Nyquist being involved as well.
Yeah, the Twitter question actually that I'm going to do here because I realized probably should have done it before talking about these races on Saturday. We also talked about this a little bit in the webinar yesterday with Andy Beyer and Steve Christ. Interested folks can check out that webinar in the DRF archive, drf.com/YouTube. And the question was about handicapping for slop races and how the strong possibility of a wet track changes the way you handicap. What effect does it have for you, Jonathon?
Well, it doesn't. I mean, it's in the back of my head until I know it's going to happen because if you won't, the amount of time that I spend handicapping, if I'm always handicapping for 2 services, I'll never even eat. You know, it's like, so I can't, you know, I just kind of put it in the back of my head. If I think it's going to be rainy or muddy, I might circle, you know, a situation in which I, you know, circle if a horse had a good race that was off. You know, you can look into the top right corner of your PPs and see if how they've run on a wet track before. In the event that it's a baby race or something, I'll click on the dam and see if the dam has 17 off, you know, sloppy track winners or something like that. But I don't let it get too ahead. I don't get too ahead of myself with it. I feel like it's one of those things you can't really control, and you'll end up doing too much extra work.
When Jonathan's talking about clicking on the dam, of course, he's referring to the program DRF Formulator and the extra information you can get about pedigree vis-a-vis Formulator. Formulator, not just a program, also a man, Mike Hogan at DRF Formulator. Mike, you were on the webinar with me yesterday but didn't get a chance to answer this question. Are there any particular extra tricks that you employ when it comes to looking at slop races?
Well, I'm kind of with Jonathon, and I believe that, you know, sure, there are horses that prefer slop, there are horses that don't like slop, but a lot of times you don't really know, and based on the PPs, you've got one horse that maybe ran well the one time they ran on slop. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the surface. I think a lot of times that sort of thing as a handicapping factor is overblown, so I wait until I know what the surface is going to be like, and, you know, look, I don't believe that a sloppy surface is going to make a slow horse beat a fast horse. I still handicap based on all things being equal, and, you know, we've seen good horses run really well regardless of surface, and that's generally my approach, especially in the bigger races.
One of the things I do also look at is I upgrade horses that are going to be forwardly placed and off tracks. I think that just from listening to tons of interviews and post-race interviews and seeing horses after races, they get assaulted by kickback when the track is really off. And I know some of them don't mind it, but a majority of them would rather not have that.
Yeah, for me, there's not much I do differently in my pre-handicapping, but it's a time where you want to pay a lot of extra attention to what's going on the day. A lot of biased surfaces are the result of strange weather conditions and things that the track maintenance crew can't really control as efficiently. So I'm not saying there's necessarily going to be a bias. There's not. Plenty of you know, more or less fair tracks, but it's when you want to be a little bit more on the lookout. Also, maybe a time to be on the lookout to see if a particular rider is riding particularly well, maybe understanding something that his competition doesn't about where you want to be on that day. Those are my little thoughts to chime in. All right, that's enough of that tangent. Let's get back to the Preakness Stakes and number 2, Uncle Lino, who seems likely to be part of the pace, breaking from the inside with his natural speed. Jonathon, what do you think of Uncle Lino, and how do you see the pace playing out in this race in general? Who's going to make the lead?
Well, it feels like it's going to be pretty quick, just based on the horses that were, you know, Uncle Lino and Lauban and Abiding Star. It feels like we're going to have a pretty honest pace here. You know, typically there's that saying that, you know, it's usually the opposite of what happens in the Derby. I just don't see how that's going to happen here. You know, I've always heard that if it's fast in the Derby, it's slow in the Preakness, and blah, blah, blah. It's got to be fast here. You know, I liked Danzig Candy going into the Derby. I was obviously wrong about that. But if I like Dancing Candy prior to that, I have to think that Uncle Lino's race was pretty legit against Exaggerator. He was one of the pace horses that stayed on the best. He came back and ran really well in California at Los Al. I mean, I think he deserves an honest chance. He's the type of horse I'm going to use in second and third at trifectas to try to add some value to this thing. But I'm not sure about his chances to win.
Mike, where are you with Uncle Lino?
I like him. I think, for a lot of the reasons Jonathon likes him, I might even be a little more bullish on him than Jonathon. He's a horse who has legitimate speed, and it's speed that, look, his only quote-unquote poor efforts were when he couldn't outrun Dancing Candy in those two races at Santa Anita. He is legitimately fast. He's shown he can carry that speed a long way. I liked his win at Los Al. Granted, it was against Lesser, but he never gave up. This is a horse that has shown some ability. And look, if he were trained by Bob Baffert and Collected were trained by Gary Sherlock, the price would be so much different here. You're getting, I think 30-1 on the morning line. I think he has a huge chance to outrun those odds. I don't know if he's good enough to win, but I'm definitely using him underneath. And one more thing I'll say about him. He's out of an unraced mare named Hazy. The second dam is a mare named Oatsy. Do you guys remember Oatsy at all?
I do remember. I remember the name. I'm trying to remember the form.
Shackelford?
Exactly.
Right.
So Uncle Lino's dam is a half-sister to Shackelford. So the pedigree is there. I don't think this horse is just a stone-cold sprinter. He's another Uncle Mo. I think he could be a good horse. I don't know if he's good enough to win on Saturday, but I'm using him for sure.
Number 3 is Nyquist, your Derby winner. Is there any beating this horse, Mike?
Yeah. Any horse can lose at any race at any given time. I think that said, he's certainly the most likely winner. He's shown that he can adapt to different surfaces. He's shown that he can adapt to different pace scenarios. I'm not going to be leaning too heavily to try and beat him. I may even just watch the race entirely without placing a single bet, but he's proven to me he's a good horse. He's proven to me that he can run on anything, and I'm not taking a stand too heavily to beat him.
Jonathon, where are you with our Derby winner? I mean, obviously you're going to be using the horse. Are you going to be pressing him up hard? Is this a chance where you would think about going all in the contest like you did last year, or are you a little more trepidatious about the Derby winner coming back in the Preakness in 2016?
Well, I'm over here doing Hail Marys because of Mike's blasphemous comments of not betting the Preakness, but
I'll probably put in a few small wagers, but I'm not going overboard. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you have to respect the horse. The performance he ran. If it was any other race, it wasn't the Derby, it wasn't the Preakness. A horse chases going a mile and a quarter, chases 45 and change, and stays on. Like, I'm inclined to upgrade the horse a little bit, regardless of what we think was going on with the track. So he's one that I'll definitely use, but he's also one that I will in some way try to beat. I'll have some tickets with some longer price horses on top, but you have to respect them off of that performance, and we all know how well Derby runners in general run when they're back in the Preakness. Running a mile and a quarter, and then the trainers and the connections feel good enough about running them back 2 weeks later. Usually they're in good form. Fitness is usually never an issue, and their performances earlier in their 3-year-old year that got them into the Derby suggest that they're quality horses. So he's one that I'll definitely use, but not a strong lean, no all-in situations.
Number 4 is Awesome Speed. Looks a deserving long shot. Any dissenting opinion there, Jonathon?
No, it's just, it's one of those situations where I got so many other horses that I'm interested in using at prices, and he's probably one that's not going to make the cut. Just nothing to get me going here. Obviously the Fountain of Youth with Mohamed, he kind of regained a little bit of his luster with his performance in the Derby, but he's probably the type of horse that I'm going to assume that he's going to be a pace casualty, and I'll be looking somewhere else.
Mike?
Yeah, same way, and I don't even think he's necessarily that fast. At least on the Moss base figures, I don't think he's as fast early as some of the other horses in the race. They may try and go, but I think that just makes them slit their own throats. I'd be surprised if he finishes in the money.
Number 5 is Exaggerator. To me, one of the 3 horses that can win this race. We've talked a bunch about the track on Derby Day. We've talked a bunch about the pace in the Derby. The more I look at Exaggerator, between all the different factors, the more I'm respecting his chance of possibly getting the win here at what maybe could be a square price for a horse that went in a race where I think there's really only 3 that can win. He did have the little bit of trouble. He did get within a length and a quarter of Nyquist, and Nyquist, Mario might have to be a little bit more tactical in terms of if this hot pace materializes that we're talking about, to exactly when he times that move. I would be tempted to use Exaggerator almost in equal measure to Nyquist, all things considered, in my bets in this race. Mike, what do you think of Exaggerator?
I understand that opinion, and I think you're right. If Nyquist doesn't win, he's the next most likely winner. That said, I don't know if, he's a horse that's lost 4 times to the favorite. On the square, he's tried different tactics. He said tried different distances. Nyquist just kind of has his number, and maybe it's a case of forward improvement in regression for Nyquist, forward improvement for Exaggerator, regression for Nyquist. But if anything, I could project potential forward improvement for Nyquist, who's now making his 3rd start off of the layoff, and his 3rd route as a 3-year-old. I wonder if Exaggerator maybe has peaked a little sooner and maybe has run some of his better races, and I don't know, at the price he's going to be, I probably won't be using him very much on top, but he's one that I would not be shocked if Nyquist wins. I wouldn't be shocked if he's the one that beats him.
Jonathan, you were sort of 1-1 on Exaggerator here. Where do you land?
I'm the laughing stock of my horse racing group text because I'm just not buying it. They've been teasing me all week. I said that someone said, yeah, well, Exaggerator's got a chance, according to Jonathon, if it rains and they move the Preakness to 1 turn. So I think he's a
one-turn thing, huh?
I still think he's a 1-turn horse that got a setup. I mean, he closes going 45.
He's got a setup here, isn't he? How's he not getting a setup here?
He might, but you're right. I made that joke that he might run well again, and then maybe I'll get my sweet revenge later. But I just he's a closer. He's a dead closer that has to overcome traffic, trying to beat a horse that he can't seem to get by. He still feels like a 1-turn horse to me, but the thing is, I think he's going to get another 1-turn setup. So call it stubbornness, but. If he wins, I lose. I'm not gonna buy in, not yet at least.
Mike made the point about the form cycles relatively of Nyquist and Exaggerator. My fear with Nyquist, now I understand fully about how well the Derby winners have done when wheeled back on 2 weeks in the race, but Nyquist, he's just been handled so carefully and had so much time between his starts, and now he's doing the come back in 2 weeks routine. Relative between the 2 horses, I feel like Exaggerator seems like one who more definitively thrives on his racing. Believe me, I'm not saying I think Exaggerator is a more likely winner than Nyquist. I just think they're kind of comparable. Exaggerator slightly less likely to win, but we're talking about getting more than 3 times the price. So that's a huge part of how I figure to weight my bets in this race. I just wanted to clarify that one point before we move on to number 6, Lonnie. The sort of comic relief element in the Derby ran a lot better than a lot of people thought. Any chance that Lonnie is putting things together and going to hit the board in the Preakness, Jonathon?
No, good for him for running better, but until he sorts out his issues, or I can't spend any money on him.
Mike?
if a closer clunks up, I could see him being one that could get a piece of things. I don't think he's going to win. I don't know if he's even good enough to make up the 9 lengths he was beaten by Exaggerator. But I guess he's a little more interesting than some of the other ridiculous long shots, so I won't knock anybody that wants to try and include.
Mike already tipped his hand a little bit about number 7 Collected, suggesting that he might be a little bit over bet based on the silver-haired wonder who trains him. Mike, will Collected be on your tickets at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's another one that's shown that he can adapt to racing surfaces and paces, and I don't think he's necessarily fast enough, and I certainly don't even think he's the best 3-year-old in Baffert's barn that will be running on Saturday. But I think he can make the try in the Super, and he's got a better running style. He's got one that I want in terms of running style more than, say, an Exaggerator in the Preakness or even a Cherry Wine type. So yeah, I'll use, but not very enthusiastically, and probably not on top.
Jonathon, your love of Bob Baffert is well documented. Does it extend to Collected?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use the horse, but to quote my buddy Nick Tamero, I hate stealing people's ideas, so I always have to throw in there my little bibliography. But Nick brought up a good point that, like, yes, obviously the horse worked amazing, and he had that Derby work, and everyone's been raving about the work, but he's a good horse. And good horses work 5 furlongs good. It doesn't mean he's going to get a mile and 3/16. And Baffert's hesitation with the horse early about his ability to go a mile and a quarter, which is practically a mile and 3/16. I just feel like he's a type that could actually get a piece, but he's not one that I'll be using on top. And I think a lot of people will, based off of his workout reports and Baffert.
The record, I'm a little bit cynical and could see playing him out of the try. Wouldn't argue with somebody who wanted to throw him in, but I do suspect there'll be more value, given my specific opinion, anywhere. If I were to use him at all, it'd be 3rd and 4th.
I'll mention one other thing on Collected that I mentioned in the little article I wrote about the Preakness. I don't know if there's much from a wagering standpoint that you want to bank on it, but it's just notable the 6 Preakness winners that Baffert's had. They all ran in the Derby with horses in the Preakness that didn't run in the Derby. The best finish he's had, he's only had 3 of them. The best finish he's had was 5th. So keep that in mind if you're looking to Baffert's record.
Right.
Small sample. Sure.
But it is interesting to point out that this one doesn't look like the ones he's had success with. I do think that's an interesting little. Mike, tell us a little bit more about that stats piece. It's up. You've tweeted it. You'll tweet it again. What's going on with it?
Sure. Well, I did one of these for the Derby where I just looked at historically some of the stats around the race and how it would possibly affect some of the runners in the actual race. And again, take it with a grain of salt. Don't use it as the basis for any of your wagering. But it was just kind of more fun stuff. Things like the 2nd place finisher in the Derby has only won the Preakness 3 times since 1963, and that's even including Forward Pass as a 2nd place finisher, who later afterwards was elevated to first purse money in the Derby. So whereas since '96, when Grindstone, the last Derby winner not to run in the Preakness, since then there have been 10 of the 19 Preaknesses have been won by the Derby winner. So just things like that. It's up there. It's kind of fun.
I know your Derby stats piece was one of the most popular articles on the site during our busiest traffic weekend of the year, so it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure this one will be very popular as well. Number 8 is Laoban, the maiden, very successful for a maiden. Taking the blinkers off, definitely part of the pace picture. What do we think? Do we think that he will still, the blinkers off, he's still going to employ the same style, go straight to the lead, and maybe just ration his energy a little better, or do we think they might try a different tactic with Laoban? Mike, what do you say?
Oh, boy. He's the kind of horse that on the face of it, you absolutely have to upgrade his effort in the bluegrass. He set the pace that set things up for closers, held on for 4th. Those are the kind of efforts you upgrade. However, he's a maiden. They're changing tactics. They're taking the blinkers off. They're changing riders to Florent Geroux. Paco Lopez had been working him in the morning, even though he'd never necessarily ridden him. Paco's style is notoriously gunning it out of the gate. Florent is known more as a jockey who can get horses to settle and finish more. To me, it seems like they want to change tactics. I don't usually like that in big races. I certainly don't like that with a horse that's never won a race before and trying to get their first win in the Preakness Stakes. And then one other negative for me, and this is a huge negative that Jay Privman wrote about on DRF Live. Eric Guillot said that Laban has developed a quarter crack since that race in the Bluegrass, and he's got a quarter crack patch on. Just scratch the horse. He's not right. Don't run him.
Well, a lot of horses have run well in Triple Crown races with quarter cracks. Touch Gold comes to mind, granted a long time ago, but it's not.
The Touch Gold was not a maiden.
Yeah, I just don't think it's. I mean, look, I just don't think I think you're suggesting that they're doing something that's not safe for the horse. I don't think that's necessarily true.
I don't mean that. I just mean he was already over his head in a race where if things were going perfectly for him, he would be a rank outsider. You know.
Who makes the top here, Jonathan?
Oh, I like Laban. I've always liked Laban. You know, I encourage people to when they're on their Formulator account, hop back and watch that sham. He got the worst ride in the world. He was super wide the entire time. And like Mike said, I mean, if you were of the belief in the Derby that you downgraded Brody's Cause and My Man Sam because they got a quote-unquote setup, then you have to upgrade Laban off of that performance. And he's one that if he runs in the try, I'm going to hit it. Unless Exaggerator wins. Then that'll win. But you know, I just think that he's definitely one that I'm going to use a lot. I'm not going to overthink or the blinkers off or on situation just because you never know what's going to happen. He's drawn outside, and if he breaks well, he's going to go to the lead. If he doesn't break well, he's going to rate. So, and with the quarter crack thing, when those situations come out and the trainer says it, then it makes me much more comfortable because if something happens to that horse, he's going to get annihilated by the press. And so the fact that he came out and said it, he's not trying to hide it. He thinks it's going in the right direction because he sure wouldn't want to expose himself otherwise.
Well, I think what happened was Privman noticed the patch and then asked about it. So I don't think he necessarily came out and said, "Hey, gentlemen," you know.
Right,
so anyway,
a little more drama with the always entertaining Eric Guillot. Number 9 is Abiding Star. Looks to be a very big long shot who's been beating up on inferior competition. Anything to contradict that, Mike?
No. No.
No. I mean, he's the type that could catch the lead, and he's one that they'll look at as he's going to come back to us, and he could stay on for a piece. He's definitely one that if you're seriously playing the trifecta, I think it would be reckless to not use that horse in third at the price that he'll be.
That's interesting. Number 10 is Fellowship. Speaking of trifectas, another one who kind of has the look to me, the way that I see this race shaping up as a bottom-up trifecta key type horse, maybe along with a horse like Cherry Wine to pick up some pieces late. Are you going to use Fellowship, Jonathan? We know you don't like to bet those closers.
No, I don't. I will use him a little bit. I think, like I said, he'll be a good price. You know, I know that he was working really, really well leading into the Pat Day Mile. You know, he didn't run as well as I think a lot of people thought he was going to, but it didn't seem like anyone was going to beat Sharp Azteca that day. He's definitely one that I'll look for. I know they wanted to try to get him into the Derby and run him 2 turns versus the 1-turn mile, and so he's definitely one that I'll consider using underneath. I don't know if he's a win type for me, but he's definitely one that I'll consider.
Mike, is Fellowship on your tickets?
Yeah, I'm similar to Jonathan in my approach to him at the price he's going to be and with his running style. I think he wanted longer than a 1-turn mile, and he'll get it here. You know, obviously the Cassie Barn liked how he came out of the race. If they want to go on to the Preakness, and you know, if there's any that are going to be picking up the pieces, I wouldn't be surprised if it's him. That said, I don't think he's good enough to win.
Number 11, Stradivari, to me is the third horse who could win this race. It's one of these things where what you're going to do in the win market is very much, I mean, as it always should be, going to be based on the price. But if you just sort of said to me, make a pick in the Preakness, I think I might pick Stradivari. I think this horse is really talented, and I don't mind the outside post that much. I think when you have the kind of speed he has and a rider like John Velasquez, he's going to find a spot for him, going to allow the pace to develop and put him in the right spot. And, you know, yeah, if he's bet down to 4-1 or something, that's going to be too short for me to use him on the win end. But in these trifecta scenarios I've been describing, I'm going to use him in first and in second, probably not much different than I'm going to use the top two if he's at least a halfway decent price, 6-1 or so. I know, Mike, you do not like the horse, so we'll let you give the converse opinion first.
Well, you know, it's not that I don't like the horse, which is, you know, I just question. Obviously, he's got talent. He showed in his last two races that he could be a freaky talent. He seems to be working well. You know, the connections are very high on him. He's a horse that I don't think, you know, we've necessarily seen the best from. That said, in his fourth career start, now he's trying his first stakes race in the Preakness against the best horse of his generation so far. You know, Nyquist is head and shoulders, based on performance, head and shoulders above every other dirt 3-year-old in North America. Is he good enough now to put in the kind of effort that he's going to need in order to win the race at the price he's likely to be, which I expect to be in the 5 to 6 to 1 range? I don't know. I'm very skeptical, and it's if you like him, you're thinking Bernardini. If you're a little negative, you're thinking Social Inclusion, both of whom were trying the Preakness in their fourth career start off of, you know, potentially freaky efforts. I'm on the more skeptical side, but I wouldn't be shocked if he proves me wrong.
Jonathon, before you give me your opinion of Stradivari, what price are you going to guess this horse is going to be?
Yeah, you know, I'm bad at this game. I think he'll be 5-1 probably. I mean, maybe 6-1, but I doubt it. Probably 5-1. And, you know, obviously, Nyquist is going to take all the money. Zadrader's going to take a ton of money. Collected, obviously, I don't think he'll be shorter than him, but Collected will take a little bit of money with Baffert. But no, I think the horse will be about 5-1. Is that? I mean, you're better at this game than I am. Is that what you're thinking?
I'm hoping for a tick or two more than that, but it wouldn't shock me, and it would put me in a funny position where I'm not going to bet to win at 5-1. I'll tell you that. That doesn't feel good enough. I'm not sure I'd bet to win even at 6-1. But I think my idea is just to use him strongly enough in those top two slots to the exact and hope there's maybe a little bit more juice in there. We'll have the advantage of being able to look at those probable pays and seeing exactly what we're dealing with. But what do you think of him just as a horse? I mean, we were sitting across from me at that Keeneland race, and I've told the story in the pod before. You called him the Preakness winner in the strides after the wire there. Was that just was that talk, or is that how you see this?
Yeah, that was before Nyquist.
Yeah, before the Derby.
Yeah. I mean, look, he's my who do you like taxi cab horse. You know, like when you're riding to the airport and people are like, what are you doing? You're like, oh, I'm going to the Preakness, or I'm going to Santa Anita to bet on the Preakness or whatever. And then they say, oh, who do you like? And then he's the one I'll tell all those people that I like.
And you're not meaning to put the cab driver away. You actually, that's your real opinion, but you're just saying it's a little more interesting than just saying Nyquist or Exaggerator. Is that part of why you
Well, yeah, and I might bet it differently too, so I don't want it to be a direct reflection of, you know. So look, I like the horse. I think he's up and coming. I think that his race at Keeneland was spectacular. First off of a break, and I don't have the stats in front of me. I know that Todd for a long time had a great stats second off a layoff in graded stakes, and he hasn't been as well. I think it does well recently, but you know, I love the horse, the race the horse got. Johnny was going to keep the horse wide anyway, so drawing the 11 doesn't really matter to me. I think he's alive for sure. I think he's definitely alive. He can improve, and he's a fresh horse.
Let's talk wagering strategy real fast. How are you looking to attack this race from a wagering point of view? Which pools?
I think, if hopefully I have some money in the tournament at this point, I think that what I would probably do is I would double key. When I say double key in the trifecta, I mean that I'm going to use 3, which is Nyquist.
No trifecta in the tournament.
Oh, exactly. Sorry. Yeah. Gee, that's geez Louise. But I'll do it in my pocket. So I'll finish my trifecta thought, and you can just transfer it to the exacta. The idea what I would do is I'm going to double key the situation where I'll go 311 with 311 with all the horses that I think are logical. I'll go 311 with all the horses that are logical with 311. Essentially saying that Nyquist and Stradivari are going to run in the try and try to have it as many times as I possibly can and hope a horse like Lauban or Abiding Star run in. And then I'll also do some stuff with, with just Lauban and in the top 3 and just maybe key him. And the same thing I would do, kind of the same strategy in the exacta.
For me, it'd be the trifecta, limiting those 3 horses, the 3 obvious horses in the top 2 spots, and trying to come up with something clever for spot number 3. Mike, how about you? What pool do you think you'll be in this race?
Probably tries and supers, maybe a little bit in the horizontal wagers, depending upon the surface of the turf and what scratches may or may not look like in those earlier races. But what I'll be doing probably most heavily is not trying to beat Nyquist too much, maybe a little defensively just because it will pay so well. But if I can somehow get Uncle Lino into that try and super, and if I can maybe get one of those 2 that's going to take money, Stradivari or Exaggerator, out of the try and super, then that's where I'm likely going to try and get paid.
All right, well, we're basically out of time, and we theoretically have 3 races to talk about. So let's just quickly go. And I did that on purpose. I think a lot of people are probably even just listening for the first time, hoping to get our thoughts on the Preakness, whereas they've never heard of the Gallarat, and who knows if it's even going to be on the turf anyway, based on the weather we're hearing. Though I do hope and think they will probably be able to keep these races on the turf. But that said, let's just give a quick thought on these 3 other public handicapper races. For those new people listening, if you're not playing on publichandicapper.com, you should be. They have contests, 3 big contests throughout the year. The current one underway is the Public Handicapper Challenge. Not too late to get in on it, and there are also weekly and monthly prizes as well. You can hear a lot more information about PH at publichandicapper.com. The first of their races this week is the Gallarat, race 10 from Pimlico. Mike, do you have a selection to share in this race?
Well, first I'll say, assuming it stays on the turf and assuming the field stays relatively intact, and I do think it's going to. I think they'll probably scratch the earlier races and try and keep the stakes on the turf. But assuming that's the case, I think this is the biggest spread race of the 4. I could make a case for at least half of the field. The 2 that I like the best, the most logical one is Heath on the outside for Bill Mott. I think this is a very good 4-year-old now making second start as a 4-year-old. She ran against some good horses in the past, most notably ran second to Lady Eli. And I think we haven't seen the best from her. I would expect a big effort on Saturday. The other long shot that Gabby mentioned is Nishirora, who I thought ran very well in the last start, may have been best, blocked a couple times in the stretch. Wouldn't be surprised if she runs really big at a nice price.
Nishirora will definitely be on any sort of pick 4 tickets I'm playing. I take your point about how a lot of horses could win this race, but if I'm playing it in multis, I am going to press up the favorite number 3, Tiger Ride, a little bit, who I think probably has the best form and figures all in all with the horses in this race. Jonathon, what's your approach to the Gallarat?
I don't know how to pronounce it, but I like the 8 horse, the Cassie horse, Joe's DeSanimo, whatever.
That sounds right.
There you go. Yeah, I like that horse. I thought the race at Churchill, the race at Tampa was good enough. It feels like they obviously weren't going to run her against Tepin in that spot, and so they decided to ship her up here, and I think the Cassies will make a nice little impression up at Pimlico this weekend.
Race 11 is the Sir Barton, the other race for 3-year-olds on the card. The other
route race. The Chick Lang is a sprint.
That's right. We have a few other 3-year-old situations. We might have a thought. If we have a second at the end, we can get to a thought on the Chick Lang. I think you have an opinion. I think one of you guys has an opinion in there, if I remember right. But the Sir Barton is the mile and a 16th race. Jonathon, did you have a thought on this one?
Yeah, I'm going to give the big horse another shot. I guess he doesn't get to call the big horse yet, but American Freedom was all the rage leading into the Pat Day Mile. Was chasing outside of a pretty darn quick pace, and I'm going to give him another shot moving forward. Feels like the type of horse that if there was a reason not to run him here, Baffert would send him back home and get him ready for the Haskell or something along the lines of this summer. But so I'm going to give him another shot in here.
Jonathon Kinchen picking a hyped Bob Baffert runner. Listeners, I'm as shocked as you. Mike, how about you for the Sir Barton?
Well, here's what I think of American Freedom. If he wins, I will not be cashing. This is the kind of horse I love to play against. A favorite coming off of a horrible effort. I love betting horses coming off of horrible efforts. That's how I get my prices. That's not what I want at 2-1 or 5-2 or whatever. Those are the kinds of horses that I try and prove are good enough to beat me. Maybe he's right. Maybe he will. You know, he's certainly got the hype. If he runs back to that debut and takes it to 2 turns, I think. Maybe I'm just completely wrong, but I think his presence creates value for every other horse in this race because he just hasn't proven to me that he's good enough to win 2 turns at the price he's going to be. So I would be looking to a horse like Dazzling Gem, who I think ran really, really well, maybe made a premature move into that hot pace in the Arkansas Derby. Obviously, the connections thought highly enough that they wanted to try and get him into the Kentucky Derby. That didn't work out, so they're here. I think he's a very good horse, and I wouldn't be surprised if Donegal Moon runs better than he did in his last start in the Bluegrass. Made kind of a sneaky middle move into that hot pace, and then just kind of faded in the stretch. He could. I'm probably going to lean most heavily on those 2.
Mike, what's your take on the Grade 2 Dixie goes as the 12th race?
This is another really, really good race, and supposedly Grand Arch is working fantastic. I think he is one of the most logical contenders in here, but I'm going to take a shot with number 11, Force the Pass, who I think is a really, really good horse, was a very good 3-year-old. Had an excuse 2 back. If you watch his race a couple back where he in the Commonwealth Derby where he lost at 2-5, you're like, well, he was wide. He was chasing down a loose leader, a huge long shot. He never really had a chance, and then he came back and ran really well, finishing ahead behind Divisadero, who later flattered that effort. I think Force the Pass is going to run huge in his second start as a 4-year-old, and I'm going to be leaning very heavily on him.
Jonathon, are you with Mike on Force the Pass, or do you have another idea in the Dixie?
No, I have another idea in the Dixie. I have 2 Cassie horses, and one of them is a love fun pick, and the other one is a legit pick. Zaw Approval, for all the people that were watching the Derby, was outworked World Approval a few works back, and so. Obviously Zaw Approval has shown his class over time, and so I think he's sitting on a big race, and so I'm going to give Zaw Approval, the old pro, another shot. The other horse is Conquest Typhoon. If you were following us on Twitter, he is the horse that ate a donut when we went to go see him. And so any horse that eats a donut is definitely going to be used in the trifecta for me.
I'm looking forward to the 21st century handicapping book that gets into that angle, the donut-eating horse. We'll perhaps that'll appear in some future work of mine. Gabby, when she was on earlier, had expressed some concern, liked Zaw Approval too, but expressed some concern about an off-going surface for Zaw Approval. Do you share that concern, Jonathon?
Say it again. You dropped out for just 1 second. What would you say?
She said she didn't think he would run as well on soft, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. That makes sense, but it's not going to keep me from using the horse. I'm going to key the horse in every spot at 10-1. I'm not going to, it's not like I'm going to bet the horse to win. It's usually what I do.
Gotcha. All right. Any other thoughts, any horses to mention elsewhere on the Preakness undercard before we let folks get to their handicapping?
Well, Lady Shipman's running. Assuming that race stays on the turf, there's 11 entered against her, which is just amazing that they found 11 11 horses that were willing to try and beat Lady Shipman. And if a strange thing happens and she does lose, I like Exaggerated, who is one of the types of horses I look for in those situations. A lightly raced 4-year-old making second start off a layoff, now trying good stakes company for the second time. I think she could run a really big race. I don't know if she's good enough to beat Lady Shipman, but I'm going to be looking to key her in the tries and supers underneath, or maybe even with Lady Shipman.
All right. Any other? Did you have one other horse you wanted to mention, Mike? If I'm remembering right from our production meeting.
Well, I don't know if I necessarily wanted to mention key a horse. I just thought that Chick Lang was an interesting race. You've got Bob Baffert, another lightly raced runner who looks like could be a good one in Justin Squared, 9-5 on the morning line. Is probably going to be much shorter in the actual betting and is the most likely winner. Yeah, exactly. Kinchen, I'm assuming you're going to be keying a $200 pick 3 through this horse?
If I make it to the track in time, you're damn straight.
All right, so one last note that I want to add. If you are listening to this within a couple hours of posting, Jonathon and I and our pal Aaron Veracruzzi will be doing a little seminar about all of these Preakness stakes tonight after the races in the Gallop out at Santa Anita. If you can't be there and you're interested, I think I'm going to Periscope it. So if you're following me on Twitter @LoomsBoldly or following me on Periscope, you can either watch us live or that'll be archived for 24 hours, and you can get a chance to see what we have to say and how we interact with Mr. Longshot AV tonight. It should be a good time. I encourage everybody to join us, and I want to thank everybody for helping out with the show today. Thanks to Gabby Gaudet, thanks to Jonathon Kinchen, thanks to Mike Hogan, and thanks so much to all of you. May you win all your old hilltop photos. 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 Photos.